He found himself walking into the archives office. "I need a background file," he told the clerk, slipping a folded bill across the counter. "Sophia Reynolds. Your CO." The young man hesitated. "That's confidential, I know. But everything has a price." Within minutes, Richard sat in the back of his car, thumbing through photocopied records. Sophia Reynolds. Born 1990. London. Mother, Clara Reynolds. Father, not listed. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Claire. For a long time he could only stare at the page. The ink blurred as memories surged, Clara's tear-streaked face, her voice trembling as she begged him not to leave, the wail of their infant daughter muffled by the slam of the door. The file slipped from his hands onto the leather seat. Sophia Reynolds was Sophia Cavendish. His daughter. That night Richard could not sleep. He paced his penthouse like a caged animal, shadows stretching across the marble floors. Every corner whispered reminders of the past he had tried to bury. For 25 years, he had built walls of steel and money to shield himself from guilt. Now those walls were collapsing brick by brick under the weight of a single truth. His daughter was not just alive. She was powerful. She held his future in her hands. And she hated him. Across the city, Sophia sat in her own apartment, the CEO mask stripped away. She held an old photograph, her mother, young and radiant, holding a baby wrapped in a faded blanket. Her chest tightened. She remembered nights in their tiny flat, her mother working double shifts, collapsing in exhaustion, whispering stories of the man who had abandoned them. The millionaire who chose fortune over family. Richard Cavendish. And now here he was, seated before her, brought low, asking for help. Justice had never felt so close. And yet, when she looked into his tired eyes, she had seen something she had not expected. Not arrogance. Not triumph. But regret. Was it real? Or just another mask from the man who had once walked away without a backward glance? She clenched the photograph tighter. "He'll know," she whispered. "Before this ends, he'll know exactly who I am." The morning sunlight streamed through the glass walls of the Metropolitan Bank's boardroom, painting everything in a harsh clarity that Richard Cavendish did not welcome. Today the board convened to discuss his loan application in full, and he was required to present himself before every director. He entered the room with deliberate confidence, though inside, a storm of dread churned. The past few days had been unbearable. The discovery of Sophia's true identity gnawed at him with a relentless ache. He had rehearsed speeches, data, charm, but now, with the woman who was his daughter sitting mere feet away, rehearsed words felt like empty armor. Sophia rose to greet him. Her expression was flawless, poised, professional, but the slight tightening around her eyes betrayed nothing of the storm she carried inside. "Good morning, Mr. Cavendish," she said smoothly. "Please take your seat." He nodded, lowering himself into the chair. Every fiber of his being strained to maintain composure, to hide the truth that had just unraveled his carefully constructed world. The board members exchanged formal greetings and prepared the agenda. Documents were spread, graphs displayed, projections scrutinized. Richard launched into his presentation, recounting his plans to stabilize the company, the strategic acquisitions, and the future growth trajectory. But every assertion he made met Sophia's meticulous counterpoints. She questioned every number, probed every claim, dissected every assumption. "Mr. Cavendish," she said softly, "your Harrington Steel figures do not account for operational delays nor the strike liabilities pending in Eastern Europe. How do you propose mitigating these risks without additional capital injection?" Richard paused, caught momentarily off guard. His usual charm could not disguise the anxiety creeping in. "We have contingency plans," he replied, though his voice lacked the certainty it had once held. "Negotiations are ongoing, and I have secured preliminary agreements with multiple investors." Sophia's lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly. Preliminary agreements are not binding contracts. And as we know, unbinding promises do not protect against financial collapse. Her words were measured, professional, but the edge beneath them was undeniable. Richard's pulse quickened. Each word felt like a calculated strike. She wasn't just assessing him as a businessman. She was testing him, probing deeper than the spreadsheets, seeing into the man he had been, and the man he had become. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The board questioned him, challenged him, scrutinized him. Richard fought back, citing precedents, historical successes, and market trends. Yet no matter how persuasive he felt, Sophia's quiet dominance held the room. She asked a question he couldn't answer, about his daughter. "Mr. Cavendish, you have disclosed some personal history in passing. Is it true that you have family obligations that might influence your corporate decisions? The question froze him. Richard swallowed hard, searching her face for a clue. Was this an innocent question, a routine inquiry? Or was there something more, some personal knowledge she wielded like a weapon? Sophia's gaze never wavered. Come. Sure. Knowing. He faltered. For the first time in decades he felt unarmed. Later, in the hallway, Richard retreated to the elevators to gather himself. He leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths. His mind raced. Memories of Clara, the baby, the flat they had shared, the life he had discarded. He clenched his fists. I cannot fail. I will not fail. Yet a persistent thought haunted him. She knows. Sophia returned to her office, closing the door behind her. She allowed herself a deep exhale. This silent battle, maintaining professionalism while holding the ultimate truth, was exhausting. But she had waited 25 years for this moment. She pulled the photograph of her mother and herself from the drawer and stared at it, her jaw tight. He will pay for every tear, every sleepless night, every humiliation my mother endured. But I will decide the terms, not anger. Her secretary knocked softly. The board will reconvene shortly, CO. Thank you, Sophia replied, sliding the photo back into its folder. She straightened her posture and adjusted her jacket. Time to return to the chessboard. Richard re-entered the boardroom, sweat pricking his brow beneath his carefully styled hair. Every glance from Sophia felt like a probe, every nod and quiet observation a test he had not trained for. The board deliberated, and for the first time Richard realized he was not just negotiating alone. He was navigating a battlefield of hidden truths, where his adversary was more than the numbers, more than the directors, more than the market itself. Sophia remained silent, observing him, controlling the pace, letting the tension mount. And with every passing minute, Richard felt smaller, weaker, stripped of the power he had wielded all his life. By the end of the session, the board deferred the decision, requesting additional assurances and collateral. Richard left the room with his pride battered, his confidence shaken. But it wasn't the board that unnerved him most, it was the quiet certainty in Sophia's eyes. She had seen through him. She had known. And she was waiting. That evening Richard returned to his apartment, weary and restless. He poured himself a drink and stared at the city lights, trying to make sense of the storm closing around him. For the first time he acknowledged the truth. Wealth, charm and influence could no longer shield him. The empire he had built, the life he had flaunted, was fragile. And his daughter, alive, powerful and unforgiving, was the reckoning he could not escape. He lifted the glass, staring at his reflection in the window. For the first time the man who had never known defeat felt powerless. And he realized that the silent battle had only just begun. The Metropolitan Bank's boardroom had never felt smaller, colder, or more suffocating to Richard Cavendish. The air seemed to press down on him, each polished surface reflecting a man who had once been untouchable, now exposed, fragile and uncertain. Sophia Reynolds sat at the head of the table, poised and composed, yet the intensity in her dark eyes betrayed the weight of the moment. Richard knew before a word was spoken, that this meeting would not be like the others. The board had adjourned for preliminary discussions, leaving only the two of them in the room. Sophia leaned forward slightly, hands folded neatly on the table. Mr. Cavendish, she began softly, yet every syllable carried authority and precision. All your life you've built empires, conquered markets and commanded loyalty. But there is one thing your wealth could never buy: accountability. Richard's throat went dry. Miss Reynolds? I don't. She raised a hand, halting him. No, let me speak. A long pause followed, thick with tension. Richard's eyes flickered with a mixture of curiosity and fear. I am your daughter, Sophia said, her voice calm, unflinching. Richard froze mid-breath. The words hung in the air, electric and undeniable. You, he stammered, his mind racing, that's impossible. I left. I know what you did, Sophia continued, her gaze unwavering. You walked away. You left my mother and you left me. 25 years of absence. Absence that shaped my life, every decision I made, every struggle I endured. And now, she said, her voice hardening, you come to me asking for help. Richard sank into his chair, the weight of guilt pressing down like a physical force. He wanted to speak, to explain, to apologize, but the words felt hollow. How could they ever repair a wound this deep? Sophia's voice softened slightly, yet the steel remained. Do you understand what your absence cost us? My mother worked herself to exhaustion. I had to fight for every opportunity, every chance to succeed because you chose ambition over family. And now you need me. Richard bowed his head, swallowing the lump in his throat. I was wrong. I made choices I thought were necessary. You abandoned us, Sophia interrupted, her voice trembling slightly, betraying the emotion she kept buried. You chose yourself. And yet here you are. You are broken. And I hold the power to decide your fate. Richard looked up, searching her eyes for mercy. Sophia, I don't expect forgiveness. I only want a chance to make things right. Her gaze softened just a fraction. Making things right cannot erase the past, she said. But it can define the future. You will face consequences. You will earn every ounce of trust and every dollar of support you hope to receive. And you will learn, she added, voice sharp again, that power is meaningless without accountability. Richard exhaled slowly, a mix of relief, shame, and awe. For the first time in decades, he saw himself clearly, not as a conqueror, but as a man humbled by his own choices. Sophia stood, walking around the table to face him fully. I will approve your loan, she said firmly, but under conditions you will follow precisely. You will operate under strict oversight. Your every move will be monitored. And one misstep. I understand, Richard said, his voice steady though his heart pounded. She studied him for a long moment. Do not take my leniency for kindness, she said. This is justice. And you will learn what regret truly feels like. Richard nodded, the weight of her judgment settling over him. He had come to this meeting seeking capital, but he found instead something far heavier, the gaze of the daughter he had abandoned, holding him accountable in a way no creditor or rival ever could. For the first time he truly understood the magnitude of his past actions. And for the first time he felt the beginning of redemption. Sophia returned to her desk, sitting with the poise of the CEO she had fought to become. You have 24 hours to review the terms, she said. And Richard? Yes? He asked, barely daring to hope. Do not forget who I am. And do not forget the life you left behind. Richard bowed his head again. I will not. As he left the boardroom, the city of London stretched before him, indifferent and sprawling. But for Richard Cavendish the skyline had changed. The world he had ruled for decades now included a presence he could neither ignore nor control. His daughter. His conscience. His reckoning. And in that revelation, he understood that the true challenge of life was not building empires, but repairing the bridges he had burned, one measured, painstaking step at a time. The flat in South London was small, barely more than a single room with a kitchenette tucked into the corner. The walls were peeling, the paint faded, and the floorboards creaked under every step. But it had been home. Clara Reynolds stood at the window, rocking a baby in her arms. Sophia, no more than a year old, gurgled softly, her tiny hands clutching her mother's fingers. Outside, the city roared, buses rattling, trams squealing, the distant hum of industry, but inside the air was thick with quiet despair. Clara's mind was a whirlwind. Bills stacked high on the table, the rent overdue, and the baby's needs pressing at every turn. She had loved Richard Cavendish once, with a fiery devotion that had burned her own ambitions away. But he had left. Walked out, leaving her with nothing but promises that dissolved like smoke in the air. She had begged him to stay. Richard, please, think of her, she had pleaded, tears streaking her face. She's too young to understand. She needs her father. Richard had been cold, detached, almost clinical in his reasoning. I was born for more than this life, Clara. For wealth, for power, not this flat, these struggles. And then he left. The slam of the door echoed through the room, a sound that would haunt Clara and Sophia for decades. Months passed. Clara worked double shifts, often leaving Sophia in the care of neighbors or a cheap nursery. Nights were spent counting pennies, rationing meals, and praying for a miracle that never came. Sophia grew up fast, forced to adapt to a world without her father's protection or guidance. She learned to read early, devoured books, and observed every adult with the keen intelligence of a child who understood the stakes of survival. Yet Clara never let despair break her. She instilled in Sophia the value of hard work, the importance of independence, and the strength to rise above abandonment. You must learn to fight for yourself, Sophia, Clara would whisper late at night, rocking her daughter to sleep. Because no one else will do it for you. And fight she did. Sophia excelled in school, winning scholarships and accolades. She grew taller, sharper, her dark eyes reflecting both determination and a simmering anger toward the father she had never known. There were quiet moments too. Moments when Sophia would stare at the photographs of a man she had never truly met, studying his confident smile, wondering why he had walked away. She often asked her mother, "Why did he leave us?" Clara's answer was always measured, never bitter. Because he was weak in the only way that mattered, he valued ambition over love. But we are strong. We will survive. We will thrive. And thrive they did. Sophia's talent and intelligence carried her through university, internships, and then the corporate world. She rose faster than anyone expected, her resolve hardened by every memory of hardship. Yet, beneath her professional veneer, the ache of abandonment remained. Every promotion, every accolade carried a shadow, the shadow of a father who had chosen wealth over family, who had missed birthdays, milestones, first steps, and first words. The day Sophia took the role of CEO at Metropolitan Bank was a quiet triumph for both mother and daughter. Clara watched from home, her hands clasped tightly. "You've done it, Sophia," she said, voice thick with emotion. "You've beaten the odds." But she also warned her daughter, gently but firmly. "And now, your father may come knocking. Be ready. You may have to face him one day." Sophia nodded, the weight of her mother's words settling over her like armor. She knew that one day the past would collide with the present. And when it did, she would be ready. 25 years had passed since Richard Cavendish had abandoned them. And now the collision was inevitable. Sophia had prepared her strategy, calculated every move. She was ready to meet the man who had caused so much pain, not as a child, not as a victim, but as a woman, a CEO, and a daughter who demanded justice. Clara watched from a distance as her daughter walked into the boardroom that fateful morning, carrying the weight of their shared past, unbroken, unbowed. And though the mother's heart ached at what had been lost, it swelled with pride at what Sophia had become. The past had been cruel, but the future belonged to them. Richard Cavendish sat alone in his Chelsea apartment, staring at the skyline of London that had once been his kingdom. The city still shimmered with opportunity, but to him, it felt distant, almost foreign. His empire had crumbled, and for the first time he felt the full weight of his mistakes, not just the financial ones but the human ones. Sophia's revelation replayed endlessly in his mind. "I am your daughter." Those words had shattered him. They had stripped away every facade he had built over decades. The charm, the arrogance, the unshakable confidence, they meant nothing now. He poured a glass of scotch, but it did nothing to calm the storm within. His wealth, his status, his achievements, they were meaningless if he could not face the daughter he had abandoned. The following morning, Richard arrived at Metropolitan Bank prepared to meet Sophia. Not as a businessman but as a father seeking redemption. The corridors of the bank felt intimidating yet familiar, a stark contrast to the warmth and chaos of the flat he had once walked away from. Sophia greeted him with her usual poise, but there was an edge in her eyes that reminded him he was no longer in control. "Mr. Cavendish," she said, "the board has reviewed your revised proposal. They are willing to approve the loan under strict conditions." Richard bowed his head. "Thank you," he said quietly. Then, gathering courage, he added, "Sophia?" She raised a hand, halting him. "Not yet. First, you must understand the conditions." Richard nodded. "I will follow them precisely. I want to make amends in every way I can." Her gaze softened slightly. "Good. Then listen carefully. You will operate under supervision, provide weekly reports, and attend financial compliance meetings. Any deviation will result in immediate termination of support. And most importantly," she paused, her eyes locking onto his, "you will attend counseling sessions not as a formality, but as a demonstration of accountability." Richard exhaled. These were harsh terms, but he accepted them willingly. Every humiliation, every restriction, was a step toward redemption. Over the next weeks, Richard worked tirelessly. He attended counseling, pored over financial reports, and implemented Sophia's directives with painstaking diligence. Every interaction with her was a reminder of the pain he had caused, yet also an opportunity to rebuild trust. Sophia observed him closely, noting the subtle changes, the humility in his voice, the care in his decisions, the recognition of past mistakes. He was no longer the man who walked away from family and responsibility. He was learning to face the consequences he had long avoided. One afternoon, as they reviewed Cavendish Holdings' recovery plan, Sophia spoke softly. "You've made progress, Richard. But do you understand why I'm testing you this way?" Richard nodded. "Yes. You need to know I'm committed not just to the business but to you. To making things right." A faint smile touched her lips, the first hint of reconciliation. "Good. Actions speak louder than words." Weeks turned into months. Cavendish Holdings stabilized under the oversight of Sophia and the bank, gradually regaining investor confidence. Richard worked harder than he had in decades, not for wealth or status, but to prove that he could change. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Richard returned home to find a small package waiting on his table. Inside was a photograph, Sophia as a child held in Clara's arms, smiling despite hardship. A note accompanied it: "Progress is not measured by wealth but by growth." Richard held the photograph to his chest, tears streaming down his face. For the first time he truly understood what redemption meant, not just in business but in life. He picked up the phone and called Clara. I want to make amends," he said, voice trembling. "I failed you both for too long. I need your forgiveness, if you can give it." Her voice, gentle and cautious, replied, "Redemption isn't a single act, Richard. It's a journey. And it looks like you've taken the first steps." Richard exhaled, relief mingling with sorrow. The journey had just begun, but for the first time he felt hope. At Metropolitan Bank, Sophia observed Richard's efforts, the gradual transformation from a man who once believed he could buy absolution to one who understood that true accountability was earned through struggle and humility. She reflected on her own journey, from a child abandoned to a powerful CEO, and realized that while the past could not be changed, the present offered the opportunity for growth, reconciliation, and even forgiveness. The silent battle had ended. A new chapter had begun. And as Richard prepared for the first meeting where he would speak directly with her as more than a father seeking approval, he knew one truth: wealth could not save him, but love, respect, and genuine accountability could. The boardroom of Metropolitan Bank glimmered in the morning sun, glass walls reflecting the bustling city outside. Today was not a meeting about numbers or projections. Today was a meeting about closure, about the future, and about the delicate bond that had once been broken beyond repair. Richard Cavendish walked in, slower than usual but steadier. His shoulders bore the weight of years of regret, but there was dignity in his posture now. The empire he had once built on ambition alone had been tempered by humility, accountability, and the lessons of absence. Sophia Reynolds sat at the head of the table, poised as always, but her expression softened as she looked at him. She was no longer the child waiting for vengeance. She was a daughter ready to recognize growth. "Good morning, Richard," she said, her voice calm but warm. "Good morning, Sophia," he replied, his voice carrying the gravity of his journey. The board members shuffled documents, but the tension in the room was unlike any they had witnessed before. This was not a discussion of financial statements. It was the culmination of 25 years of human consequence, of choices and regrets, and of a reckoning long overdue. Sophia spoke first. "The bank has reviewed Cavendish Holdings' performance under the new oversight. You've adhered to every term, every requirement. The company is stabilizing and investor confidence is returning. I am satisfied with the progress." Richard's chest tightened. He had expected judgment, rejection, perhaps even disdain. Yet here she was, recognizing his efforts, acknowledging the changes he had made, not just in business but in character. "And," Sophia continued, locking eyes with him, "on a personal note, I see that you have taken responsibility. You've faced the consequences and you've committed to change. That matters more than any balance sheet." Richard swallowed, emotion catching in his throat. "Sophia, I can never undo the pain I caused, but I want you to know, I'm truly sorry. For everything." A faint smile touched her lips. "I know. And it's taken me this long to see that people can change, Richard, even those who walk away. The past does not disappear, but it can guide the present." For the first time in decades, Richard felt light. The shame that had haunted him, the self-imposed exile from the daughter he never knew, was beginning to lift. Clara entered the room quietly, having been invited by Sophia to witness this moment. Her eyes glimmered with tears as she saw the two most important people in her life standing together, no longer divided by absence, but connected by choice and reconciliation. "You've both come a long way," she said softly. Richard turned to her, voice trembling. "I have failed you, Clara. But I hope I can rebuild what I destroyed." Clara smiled, her hand resting on Sophia's shoulder. "You've already started, Richard. Actions speak louder than words." Weeks later, Cavendish Holdings was thriving once more. Richard had proven himself under Sophia's guidance, navigating each challenge with humility and care. Investors had returned, employees were confident, and the legacy of the company was now intertwined with the story of redemption and accountability. Richard and Sophia shared quiet moments, not just as CEO and client, but as father and daughter. They discussed business but also life. Shared memories were created for the first time. Lessons were taught, laughter was shared, and the bridge that had been destroyed 25 years ago was being rebuilt, plank by plank, with patience and trust. One afternoon as Richard and Sophia walked along the Thames, he paused. "I never imagined this would be possible," he said. "That we could start over even after all these years." Sophia looked up at him, the faintest warmth in her eyes. "Life gives second chances, Richard. But only if we're willing to work for them. We've both had to grow, to face our mistakes, and to choose to forgive ourselves and each other." He nodded, feeling the weight of those words. "I promise I won't squander this. Not again." Sophia's smile widened slightly. "I believe you." And now we move forward, together. The river flowed beside them, indifferent yet eternal, much like life itself. Shadows of the past lingered, but the present was theirs to shape, and the future promised the legacy of reconciliation, growth, and the enduring power of family. And in that moment, Richard Cavendish understood what true wealth really meant. Not power, not money, not status, but love, trust, and the chance to make things right with the people who mattered most. The empire he had lost was restored, but more importantly, the bond he had once abandoned was reclaimed. And this time he would never let it go.